Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Anthony Ukpong. I'm a data analyst with about 10 to 12 years of airline pricing experience, well, airline experience in general, but most of it has been in airline pricing. And I'm going to talk about how, well, it's on the subject of everybody's lips, AI has affected this industry. But the interesting thing about it is that um, the lessons you can learn from airline pricing apply to a lot of other industries, as you see in the slide. So let's just dive in. Um, Feel free to ask any questions as we go along, but I'm pretty sure I'll cover everything that's not tackled in the slide at the end. And of course, let's make this an interactive conversation. So let's go ahead and start that. So first of all, let's just take a short trip down memory lane. Uh, Up until the mid to late 70s, especially in the USA, which still remains the largest market for airlines and flying, airline pricing was fixed, and so by regulation. But the regulation came in and unleashed the competition, allowing airlines to price independently. The thing about you have to also always think about or consider when it comes to airline pricing or selling tickets is that the amount of seats on the plane is fixed, and once the plane is built and the flight is scheduled, you cannot add more seats. So, to a large extent, supply is rigid. Of course, you can always take planes in and out of service, but that's just the best way to think about it. And but the most important thing to think about is that um, inventory of flights or seats on a plane are a perishable item, and what that means in this definition is that the moment the flight takes off, you can't get it back. And so you have to think about how you price and sell airline flights differently. And if you're like me, I had a totally incorrect view about why airlines price things the way they did until I started working in the industry and I realized, oh, okay, it sort of makes a lot of sense. Um, Yield management was the first version of revenue management, and I'll talk about the different versions as we move along. But the goal, there's a mathematician, an economist called Ken Littlewood, who came up with a formula, and it is, or an equation, or a way of thinking it. I have a price, a seat to sell. Do I take it right now, guaranteed at a low fare, or do I take a chance that someone will pay higher down the line? And it's that formula that has guided airline pricing throughout up until today. Um, Airline pricing in the industry, once you get behind the scenes, is sort of broken up into two major pieces. You have pricing department in every airline that sets the prices, and then you have the yield management that determines which of those prices are going to be put forth for the customer to be able to purchase, right? So pricing department or prices will say, okay, we want a business class ticket to be $500 or economy to be $200, and then yield will look at the demand and say, okay, let's have 10 of those seats at this price and 20 of those seats at that price, and so on and so forth. So yield management are the gatekeeper. Um, Pricing is the menu. They create the menu, but they work closely hand in hand. You can't really have one without the other. And so airlines do a lot of segmentation because they're trying to find the best prices to give the individual passenger. And so one of the broad segmentation, and they use rules and fences, is it business versus leisure. Usually, people travel on business are on a company dime. The company is paying for the trip, and so their budgets are different from those traveling for personal reasons. Also, a personal trip will typically plan way in advance. Typically, business trips might be planned last minute. So you hear things like 14-day advance purchase (AP). That's what it means. Or they might say Saturday night stay. That way, you want to make sure that it's a leisure traveler, um, because you don't want it to give a corporate traveler the same price as a leisure traveler. Or you might have a situation where a ticket is non-refundable, right? Um, just to make sure that you charge those who need the flexibility more than those who don't. Okay. But as airlines grew and the networks expanded, it became more and more complicated to price tickets, to consider all the routes, consider connections, and things of that nature. Way back in the 70s, it was just basically flat. It was. business class one price, coach seats one price. Or first class, it was first class back then. Business is relatively a new concept. And so to maximize revenue, airlines would add more and more analysts, and there's constant complex computation that they have to do. So many factors to take into consideration, both from the airline's point of view and from competition in the market. And so you find that, for example, yield analysts are constantly opening up and closing inventory. That's the industry lingo, meaning opening up more seats at a certain price and then closing them up at a certain price depending on demand. It's a constant um, juggling act. Most airlines start selling their tickets about 11 months or 12 months in advance, or rather 12 months and less 1 day in advance. And so across the life cycle of that particular flight, they're constantly fine tuning what prices to sell the tickets at. Some routes sell at the last minute heavy, and some routes start selling far out. For example, a lot of international routes where people are falling in the category of VFRs, that's visitors, family, and visiting family and relatives, they might book much further out. Okay, so that's the challenge that faces the analyst. Multiply that by multiple flights, by multiple routes, and it can become pretty complicated to manage. Some of the larger airlines have 400 to 500 people working on pricing their routes and the networks because they have thousands, 7,000 flights a day and above, depending. Okay, so yes, I had also already referenced this. This was back in the old days where everything was just flat pricing, first come, first serve. There was no segmentation. Prices were static regardless of the demand and the timing. And this is just an example. Um, but let's use a case study to compare the potential revenue between the two scenarios. That's pre-revenue management and post-revenue management. So on a typical route, we have our flight from JFK to Miami. The plane has a capacity of 150 seats. You have 120 that were actually sold, 10 in business, 110 in economy. Based on this, the simple flat rate of 10 business at 500 and 110 economy seats at 250 gives you a total of 32,500. Just a simple example. Flat, that's it. No granularity. However, once you start implementing things like fences, that's I mentioned before, advanced AP, Saturday night stage, start segmenting passengers into more granular groups, and then once you start incorporating historical data, right, you can have you can really have some more interesting results. And so once a flight has existed for at least a year, an airline has at least something to start looking and say, hey, the same time, December 1st, 2004, how many seats did we sell? How full was the flight when it went out? What was the buying pattern? How many people bought in the last day, last 1 week, months before? Have all this data, and you start using that data to now power the RM engines. Now, I'm going to talk about three eras. There's the before deregulation, flat pricing. The sort of the current era that we're in that has a little bit of AI, but it's still mainly pre-AI depending on the airline. And then there's the future where we're going to. And like I said before, this is relevant to other industries, and I'll give some examples down the line as well. So now, since the early 19s, since American Airlines, funny enough, sort of invented revenue management or really at least kicked it off, the approach has been a bit different. So let's look at business class. Instead of having a flat 500, they may segment it and say, you know what, if the passenger is buying in the last week or last 3 days of the flight or less, that's the AP advanced purchase, is that let's charge them $750. But if the passenger is ready to buy 2 3 weeks out or 6 months out, let's charge them in this example $333. So it's a bit restricted. You have to write out and maybe let's require a 1 week minimum stay, right? To make sure that they're really people who are traveling for leisure. But you have different prices. So you had our 500 in the middle before, but now you have some prices lower and some prices higher. Likewise, in economy, let's say they have some deep discount tickets, then they have some standard tickets, and they have some mid fares instead of the flat fare that they had before. Using this rough example, you sold 20 economy seats at 199, 60 at 280, and 30 at 350. Likewise, you sold four um, business class or first class ticket a bit higher than you'd have done before, but you also sold six a bit lower than you did before. But when you total everything up and add the numbers, if my math is correct, you actually made more by revenue managing the flight. So yes, you did sell some tickets lower, but keep something in mind: when you sell tickets lower, you attract an audience or customer base that may not have considered flying prior to that point in time because of the cost of ticket. And it's always that balance, right? You also do not want to sell a ticket for for $100 when the passenger was ready to pay $200. And so it's all about maximizing revenue. But in our current state, this method of bucketing and segmenting into different groups, categories, passenger types always unlocks extra value when you do it properly. And so without increasing what we call the load factor in industry, still the same exact number of seats, but by being flexible with the business price tickets, you captured some people's demand further out. Hey, people looking 6 months out, thinking about where they're going to go to the vacation, saw a good price, they bought the ticket. And then at the same time, you still make sure that those who came at the last minute, your typical business class, I mean, your corporate passenger who's ready to pay more, because it's usually the company account, you're still able to get that revenue. So this chart just shows a simple comparison between the two, pre-revenue management strategy and our current state of the industry. And so, but moving forward, yeah, just reiterating that it was about a 14.6% um, increase in revenue in this example, when it works out properly, because a lot of times it doesn't work perfectly, but generally it does. So um, now I'd mentioned before that if you have an industry that has these three factors: a fixed capacity, for example, a hotel room, a stadium, right? Perishable inventory. Once the night passes, if that hotel room is empty, you cannot sell it twice tomorrow. Unlike maybe beans or yam, if you don't sell it today, Coca-Cola, you can still sell it tomorrow, or beans or whatever product. And then bear in mind that you can segment the demand, because even on the same flight, or the same stadium, or the same hotel, or the same car rental, different customers have different willingness to pay. Somebody who even comes at the last moment really needs to spend the night there would shell out more money than um, somebody who's flexible and travels. So that's why, even though this presentation is geared towards the airline industry, it really applies to so many more segments, so many more industries going forward. Okay, um, hotels, like I mentioned, events, car rentals, and RMS. Revenue management is everywhere. I've even seen it on tolls. If you're traveling, sometimes you notice that the toll rates are different at different times. It's all about revenue managing. And then part of the trick about revenue management, especially going forward, and hotels really started doing this after airlines started revenue management, is look at the totality of what the customer can bring. So a hotel is, they're very good at this. They might, if they see a large group, they might reduce the prices per room for a large group, knowing that, especially if there's an event connected to a large group, knowing that they'll spend more on catering, they'll spend more on spas, they'll spend more on conferences and all the things related to it. And so you always have to try and think about the total value, not just the individual price points. So get them through the door, and knowing that when they come there, especially for things like a conference or an event, a wedding, they're going to spend on a lot of ancillary services. So that's how even airlines and a lot of businesses, whether it's stadiums, are starting to look at customers holistically, get them through the door, and maximize revenue. Okay, so all when you have a main product and then you have other things you can add on, these are called ancillary services. And so artificial intelligence, AI, going forward is really key to helping unlock that revenue. All right. Um, Now, it's not just in pricing, even though we're going to focus on pricing, but AI has already started transforming all sorts, even the operation. Once you have lots of data, for example, on engine parts, and you see when and how engines fail based on so many factors: where did the plane fly? What was the weather? what was the capacity, all sorts of things, right? Um, you model it, and you now start being able to predict when the engine may fail going forward, and position maintenance around that time, especially preventive maintenance. When it comes to the customer aspect, I remember when I was working for one of the airlines, the bigger airlines in the US, I was part of the pilot program where we tested the chat feature where instead of calling, you could chat. And even back then, this was about 8, 10 years ago, they knew that the next evolution was to hook it up to large language models or robots or computers. Nobody really knew what it would look like, and then have those systems do a lot of the autonomous and routine stuff like, oh, where's my flight? Help me rebook my travel and things of that nature. So that was an interesting project, and seeing it play out over the years has been fascinating. Because an airline, rather, the AI models can take into consideration so many things. What's the weather? What's even small things like how many rooms are available in that city where the weather is going to impact at that night, and therefore how many people can I offer overnight stay versus how many people must I rebook? Where are my crew? Where are my planes? Things of that nature. Where's the catering? Okay, now I had mentioned before that what happens in the current state is that instead of having one flat rate that we had decades ago, we've segmented it. If you ever check your ticket or your reservation next time you travel, or look up any of your old tickets, you're gonna see something that um, is called a PNR. And if you go through the fare rules, you probably see something called a fare basis code. Always starts with a letter. Um, that those that fare basis code, it indicates what buckets you were put into. Most airlines use like J, D, I for business buckets, and a lot of airlines use Y, A, B, C. It varies from airline to airline for coach. Typically, you have only 26 letters in the alphabet, so including um, what we call non-review tickets, including mileage tickets. They only have 26 alphabets to play with. For some airlines have four cabins. They have first class, business class, premium economy, and coach. Right. So somehow each airline has to figure out a way to use those 26 letters in combination with other letters to try and give you a product. Right. So if you see the number 14 or number 4 rather, or 7 or 3 somewhere in your fare basis code, that might be your advanced purchase of 7 or 3 days, or 4 for 14. Varies with airline, but those are typically the standards. Now, the reason why I mentioned that is because um, the current system allows you to bucket people, but it's all about more and more granularity. And so going forward, where the industry is moving to, and again, not just airlines, hotels, car rental, everybody's moving that direction, is what you call continuous pricing. So the way it works right now is um, an airline might say the prices between $0 and $50, right, are in bucket P. Then $51 to $100 are in S, and so on and so forth, trying to segment people. Okay, but what happens is that let me go back. What happens is that it's still not as smooth a jump as the airline would log. So what if you had a passenger who is ready to pay more than $100 but doesn't want to pay $150, and you don't have any other way to bucket them? That's where airlines and AI can come in and be really useful tool to help unlock that value. So continuous pricing is where the algorithms to the dollar, to the cent, use hundreds, sometimes thousands of factors to try and figure out the passenger's willingness to pay at any point in time. And bear in mind that uh, there are lots of moving pieces. What you may even be willing to pay, or generally speaking, today might not be what you'll be willing to pay a week before the travel. You might be more desperate, or conversely, you might have actually lost interest. Okay, so that's the logic behind it. Let's go through a few more slides. Traditional RM models just use typically linear regression, simple regression models rather. And so you put in certain formulas and you say, okay, this times that times that times that, and it's simple-ish relatively compared to where things are going. But the problem is that these models are always going to struggle with messy and unstructured data. These models are always going to not have the most up-to-date information. And some of these things, models are not designed to react in real time. A human being still has to go in and say, oh, uh, guess what? We had flights going to Miami, but Miami local team just won a champion, and so now many more people want to travel, so many more people are ready to pay, and so the analyst has to go in and start tweaking the prices. Well, AI models are able to ingest all sorts of data points, and you still have to train them. It's not automatic by any means, but they can now adjust in real time, be connected to more data sources instead of just a few um, pieces of information and criteria. So the advantage is that without having, when you want to set up your models and your algorithms properly, without having too much full-time human intervention, the models can learn by themselves and adjust accordingly. You still always have to supervise because trust me, sometimes they go off the rails. But properly done, it allows for so much more efficient pricing and price matching. Bear in mind that uh, you can consider any form of pricing, whether it's hotels or airlines, as a competitive sport because as you're setting your prices, even your competition is adjusting upwards or downwards, and so you always have to remain nimble and dynamic. So again, the advantage, it all boils down to superior forecasting, the ability to ingest large sums of data that simple regression models can't handle, taking things like real-time competitor pricing, taking things like social media, sentiment, mood, be very targeted when it comes to even days off for holidays or for spring break and things of that nature. Here we just got off Thanksgiving break, and Thanksgiving, funny enough, is usually one of the busiest travel periods, at least in the United States. And so, uh, but at the same time, you always have bad weather in some part of the country. And so these models can forecast more accurately than regular model current state can do. All right. And the most important thing, like I said earlier, that it can, to a large extent, become autonomous, especially when you use any reinforcement learning model. So after being able to predict, you can set up the system to act on its own. Uh, Again, usually try and have a human being intervene and double check, but it just keeps on learning and doing, and based on its reward, if being higher revenue, uh, it knows that okay, this formula under these conditions is the way to go. And so we joke in the industry that very soon you're just going to have two machines pricing against each other and fighting it out. And to an extent, that is sort of where we might be heading to. But moving forward, you always have to make sure that you are not well, the models are balanced, right? Uh, we human beings, we as prices, we have our emotions. Let's put it that way, right? Put two same people playing poker or any other sport or trading the stock markets, we have our emotional tendencies for risk. Using sophisticated models removes that. It focuses purely on the data, and therefore it knows how to dispassionately, once you've trained these models properly, just go through and act in the best interest of trying to raise this revenue. But of course, you always have to be careful. Um, Model training is a huge component, right? But AI models tend to be less risk averse once you tune them properly than a human being might be. So let's sort of revisit our previous flight, our case study, and say what happened if AI was able to go from having those fixed buckets that I mentioned earlier on to what we call even micro pricing, right? Where you can scrape the competitor's website on a certain route, look at the flight that's at the closest time. So let's pick our JFK to Miami. Let's say you have two airlines. I'll mention some major airlines in the US, American Airlines and Delta Airlines. And at that flight, at 4 o'clock, American Airlines is charging $200 in real time right now. Now, the old system, you may have your price at $150, but if American Airlines is charging at $200, an AI system can go check that website, come back and say, you know what, we can charge $190 and undercut them for a price flight at that same time. So these are the type of things that are simply just not possible, right, with current models. Hotels do that all the time. They're scraping other hotels' websites to figure out what price they should be offering at the same time. Also, um, another thing that these models do is they unlock hyper personalization, which means that you can really offer to the passenger what you think would be of value to them. Let's say that you have a passenger who, based on previous trends, you have noticed that they're ready to pay, and this might not be something that is common all over the world. So you board by zones, right? And everybody wants to get on the the flight first and get a good seat, or rather, put that carry on, get situated before others, get comfortable. Well, how much is the person ready to pay for that? Should we call it benefit? uh, the models can test customer behavior and offer during the booking process or the checking process those extra $10, $15 to encourage the passenger to pay for that privilege. And so these small offerings throughout the life cycle of the person's trip can add up to a significant um, amount of money from this what we call ancillary revenue. Looking at our pricing example, the model takes a look 60 days out and determines that demand for this flight is soft. So the AI will now price 5 seats at $185 in this example instead of the $200, just to try and stimulate early volume. Then 10 days out, the competitor hiked its price and the AI instantly raises its medium fare from 400 to 412, maybe still remaining just a bit under the competitor. So you're maximizing what you're going to charge without losing any customers. Again, airlines are the examples in this our conversation, but it applies to almost any industry with perishable goods. And I'd mentioned ancillaries. The example I sort of skipped ahead and mentioned it, where you offer the business traveler priority boarding. Um, you offer families baggage bundles. I've seen situations where nowadays, within the last 3 or 4 hours, you get an offer to upgrade yourself to a different cabin for what would be considered a decent discount over the price you would have been offered if you had tried to buy it at that price when you bought your ticket. And I've seen situations where airlines now allow passengers to book, or rather to bid for the remaining business class seats. So day of travel, they have 20 seats capacity, but they've only sold 10. They might start offering to the highest bidder who wants to upgrade, right? And they let the passengers determine what they're ready to pay for. And based on that, encouraging people to sort of compete with each other and further get the best price possible. Now, that same data is now taken and fed back into the system later on, maybe the next year around the same time, the same flight. They'll use that same information and say, you know what, we offered 4 people this amount, right? Or rather, we had 10 seats available. 7 people offered this amount. 3 people offered this amount. 2 people. Okay, this looks like the price point that would have got us to sell this seat regardless. How about we take this same new price point and offer it to these people 2 weeks in advance with $50 extra discount? I can't overstate how crazy and granular it can get in this industry, and you all have a ton of smart people always come up with ways to sell and optimize revenue. But the result is higher conversions on sometimes non-ticket items. You play to people's sentiment and you meet the demand. And this graph here just sort of um, highlights or explains what I was trying to differentiate. And so I'll just spend a minute on it. Your steps you have are your sort of the old or the current way. fixed, prices, 150, 280, 400, right? It's a step ladder. Anything between is sort of lost. So between your 150 and your 280, right? If somebody was ready to travel, but guy, all I have is 250, right? Well, maybe you're not able to sell to that person because you have closed out your 150 and you now have your 280. But the continuous pricing is that smooth curve, right? Where the 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 model determines exactly what someone was ready to pay, and essentially it's offering so many more steps. Because if you think about it, even a curve is essentially this type of step, but it smooths out to um, level one molecule or whatever. So that's what's happening. Um, a human being could not set all those price points. It's just not possible. But a machine properly tuned can do that. And so that's what this particular slide highlights. And so just take this with a grain of salt, but again, this is just an example. I tried to double check to make sure that my math was right. But using our running example of that flight from JFK to Miami, instead of a flat 280, the AI will smooth the pricing curve and capture demand at different points throughout, right? So some people that would have been charged 150, it'll raise it to 165. Um, Likewise, some 280s might raise to 305. And even though it's on this slide, sometimes you drop the price a bit to capture people who would have walked away. But that smoother curve um, nets some tangible gains. In this example, there was an extra $2,600 locked, unlocked, which was a little under 10%. And um, the same thing happened in business class with the seats, but so I don't need to spend too much time on that. Instead of just having that flat 500, we're done six tickets at 360 and then four tickets at 1,050, right? So some lower, some higher, right? Um, than not the flat 500, rather the 300 and the 900 that we have from our current model. 500 was pre-revenue management, but the, the volume can be smaller in business and first class, but overall the revenue is still high. Fun fact: most airlines make their money from the business cabin. The coach and economy is just to pay the bills. It's the business cabin that most airlines make their money from. Okay, and just driving home the point, the current slash old RM systems as pre AI would have yielded 39,000 flight, while AI driven in this our example yields 45,000. So that's 13% increase. Now scale that across a fleet of 500 craft fly four times a day, and you find out that it's really worth the investment in this technology. It's nothing short of revolutionary. And a segue is on the margins in airlines are very, very narrow. Most airlines are losing money. Believe it or not, airline industry is really capital intensive. There's a joke in industry that how do you become a millionaire? And the answer to that is you have $1 billion and you buy an airline. That's how you become a millionaire. So, but it's a consistent business, and it's a glamorous business, which is why it attracts um, a lot of people. I guess I should admit. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. So let me move on. Okay. So this is our hope, right? We hear a lot about AI replacing human beings, and I'm not going to dismiss that. I believe, depending on your role, that may be the case. But to a large extent, right now, at least in these industries, um, AI is going to elevate and work together in tandem. So you shift from being a data entry clerk, so to speak, to being someone who manages models, tunes them, trains them, and then you focus on higher level business goals, right? And you'll always need a human being, if nothing else, for legal reasons to validate AI's logic, because every ticket sold is actually a legal contract between the airline and the passenger. It's not just a product. Okay. Um, Now, this is where things get a bit tricky. The moment you start introducing AI or anything, you have to make sure that you are not discriminating against people. Um, in the industry, when we use, for example, people's zip codes to gain insight, you don't want to price people based on the zip code, meaning that if someone comes from a less affluent part of the country, you don't want to, or more affluent, conversely, you don't want to be overcharging or them or taking advantage of them. You want your determination of passengers' willingness to pay should be based on sensitivity and product flexibility, sensitivity and product flexibility. You don't want to be based on ability to pay, demographics, the browsing history, the personal income. And here in the United States, the DOJ is they're big on that. They're very vigilant on that. You cannot, you're not supposed to price gouge. Again, as a digression, as a fun fact, anytime we have a weather incident here in the United States, a lot of airlines do immediately freeze their prices. And the reason is because, let's say there's a tornado in Florida. They're always having some tornado, or rather, weather hurricane. Um, more people are going to want to travel. So normally the model would start automatically if you didn't do anything, raising up the prices because people are traveling to try and get out. Okay, so the plane normally had 100 seats left to sell, just as an example. And people need to move quickly. So it's quickly selling out. And automatically, after the first 10 are sold at $10, it'll close out the bucket, the next 10 at $20, and so forth. But what happens is the moment we get those weather alerts, uh, every airline I know and I've worked for will freeze the prices at a reasonable price, let's say $20, and prevent the automatic closing and prices from going up because you don't want to be accused of price gouging. So it's something important. But you now have to take the same philosophy all the way into your artificial intelligence models because without human guidance, there's the tendency they'll do the same thing. So always maintain, always be fair. So as we wrap up, just a recap of how things have evolved over time. Pre 1978, pre deregulation, fixed prices, there was no strategy. Walk up to a plane, buy your ticket, same price whether you bought it the day before or a year in advance. Then between 1980s and um, 2010s slash where we are now, fare buckets typically divided into about if a plane, a flight is divided into about 20-25 segments depending on the airline, the route, the capacity, and rough buckets of pricing. Where we're going to in the future is continuous AI predictive pricing, where pricing is always constant, changing from day to day and being refiled. And with that, I think I've yeah come to the end of my presentation. I do thank you guys for your attention, and happy to take any questions.
All right. Thank you, Anthony, for that. I know it was a bit technical and you broke it down quite nicely for us. So, ahead of other questions that may come in, I guess my first question is that what would be the applicability of this type of model of dynamic pricing in other fields other than airlines? Because when you and I spoke ahead of this, you were talking about how with the creation of this model of dynamically pricing tickets, it will eventually spread to other fields. So what other fields do you expect it to reach out to? And where do you see the future going for pricing of other items? Thanks.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So it's already in the hotel industry, 100% that I know of. It's already in the entertainment industry when it comes to stadiums and events ticketing that I'm also well aware of. Amusement parks, car rentals, and the logic is always the same. Bear in mind, unlike your bag of cement that if you don't sell it today, you can sit on it for 6 months maybe. Then one huge construction will come up and you just sell everything for the last 6 months. When it comes to these three examples, you need to make sure you get rid of that product on that day or that particular time. Sea cruises, car rentals. I've mentioned that before, hotels. And so having the ability, so think about it. Let me use hotels as an example. You know that there's a storm, right? Or and let's say 20 or 30 years ago, there's 50 hotels in the town or where the location, and there's a storm. So now everybody, yeah, I heard something. I feel it's also applicable to UK Rail. Yeah, this is worldwide, by the way. Every country is using it now. It's not just I use the United States as an example, but it's everywhere now. The- every country, a lot of industry. So you have a hotel room. Now you're selling your hotel rooms at, let's say, $100 a night. But what if you could find out that your competitors' rooms have all closed, they're all sold out, and therefore you could charge 200 a night? This wasn't possible 10 years ago, but now you have um, different aspects of the system. One aspect of the system is the web scrapers that are scraping competitors' websites where possible and getting their prices, right? The other aspect is, okay, maybe another part is looking at the weather, knowing that historically, anytime it rains 2 inches, bookings go up by 10%. 4 inches, bookings go up by 25%. Another one is your own system that is seeing more traffic on Twitter, your social media, and stuff of that nature. Combine all that together and find the best way to fix a price. So the key word is the good perishable? Must it be sold at a certain time, or else you've lost any opportunity of getting revenue? If the answer is yes, those examples of the industries are just a few, and I'm sure there are more. Real fantastic example. Transportation generally falls under these categories. I, I'm seeing, I'm hearing, and I'm seeing even shopping locally. And what do I mean? You have your Walmart, you have your Kroger, you have your Costco, sometimes within 4 or 5 miles of each other. Granted, you can do a lot of online purchases, right? Uh, but at the same time, think about a situation where your website is constantly getting pinged for, let's say, milk, and you're running out. What if your system could go and look at competitors and say, hey, you know what? Nobody else is selling. Um, everybody else has run out of milk right now. You always have to be careful. You don't want to price gouge. Bear that in mind. But within reason, you might be able to adjust your prices to accommodate for that. I know that there's a lot of we just finished Black Friday scraping, but a lot of the bigger retailers are always checking other people out to see what they are setting their prices at and adjusting. I think I saw a question in the chat. Um, no, I did. Okay, so this- there are some industries that may not be best suited. Um, healthcare, some aspects probably, but from the when it comes to pricing, the whole thing about healthcare pricing, especially in the US, is a very convoluted subject. It is pretty tricky um, because it's a mess, right? You have insurance companies, you have so many layers of bureaucracy. I'm not sure it can be as dynamic. And typically, some of these things, the rates and everything are negotiated way in advance. But so not every industry is going to lend itself or have the opportunity for AI pricing to play a role, at least not throughout the entire life cycle or for every aspect.